Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thank you all so much for being here today. We are here to discuss an article that was in the New York Times Magazine in May that really dug deep into a family conflict. And what was interesting about the article is that it gave all the sides, except really, I suppose, the side of Diane, who was the woman who was diagnosed with dementia. So I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation with those of us who are impacted by these kinds of conflicts and decisions and disputes. And so I'm grateful to those who have joined me live. And I say hello to those who are watching the archive. The archive does include a link to the article, and you are welcome after watching the archive to share your thoughts in our comments section. Okay, so I read the article initially a couple weeks ago, and then I reread it this morning. And I pulled out some of the major themes. And one of the first questions that popped out at me was actually the first question that leads into the article. And that is, when cognitive decline changes people, should we respect their new desires? And I'm curious what you guys think in terms of how do we answer this question? What do you think? There was an article on slate.com. So what year are we in now? 2023. Honest to goodness, it was 15 years ago. And it was an article about two residents of a facility who appeared to fall in love, but both had dementia. And it was basically this very same question. When cognitive decline changes people, should we respect their new desires? And part of the question with the couple from the article 15 years ago or so was whether or not they were able to give consent to have a sexual relationship because they were having sex in the facility. And that was one of the other themes that came up during reading of the most recent article in the New York Times. Talks about how do we give consent. So I guess if we were to put ourselves in the place of the mom, so that's Diane, who's diagnosed with dementia, if we consider ourselves to be in a similar situation, I'm curious, how do we feel about others respecting our new desires? What do you think?
I'm thinking.
So do we think that dementia changes our desires? Let me go to the next slide. Maybe this will help. Okay, so there were other themes that came up during the article. And one was around power of attorney. And I was saying this before we started the recording. I wasn't sure if one of the sisters actually had power of attorney, a durable power of attorney. The article talks about Diane giving her boyfriend durable power of attorney, but it doesn't say that she revoked an earlier power of attorney. So I wasn't sure if that was an issue. So I guess one of the things that we know right off the bat is that we want to make sure we have our durable powers of attorney in order. And it also made me wonder if when we create our own power of attorney, we could include a clause that says a power of attorney can only be revoked under these conditions. So that if we have a cognitive impairment, there are safeguards in place so that we don't revoke a power of attorney during a moment of confusion. There are checks and balances. And that was the one thing that I thought just was screaming from the article, is that there weren't a lot of checks and balances in place. So for instance, there was an attorney that was representing, oh gosh, this gets confusing. There was one attorney that was representing, the boyfriend and the mother. And so that seemed to be a conflict of interest, but that was allowed to go forward. So there didn't seem to be a lot of times where someone could step in and say, wait a minute, let's figure this out. Let's not just automatically say this is okay. Okay,
Well,
so
there are so many issues here. First of all, that's a good point about the power of attorney, is having something in there about whether it could or should, under what circumstances, be revoked.
yes,
Like, I'm going to check mine and my
yes,
mom's, and I'm going to find
yes,
out, because I don't know.
yes,
And while it is true that in the past that might not have been an issue, in the future we can anticipate it will, especially with cognitive decline
right,
being far more common today, and also because the decisions that are made around this time are far more consequential,
yes,
financially consequential, and not just for the person, but for the entire family who might be involved. I was going to say, thinking about your first question, is, at one level, is what health and safety issues are involved. Are there health and safety issues that are involved? I like the counsel that I got from Deborah Hollisey when we were going through this, is as long as she is of sound mind, she has the right to make the wrong decision. And we lived by that for a long time. Then that gets to your next slide about what's going on with the condition, what is the diagnosis, and is this the disease you're hearing from, or is this the old self, or in our case, the progress of the disease did not change her wishes. Her old self and her new self wishes were the same. Unfortunately, they just couldn't be met now safely for her and reasonably for us, because we were starting to suffer in all the ways that caregivers suffer, in terms of our own health and our own finances and things like that. So that led us to say what we needed was to think more about what was best for the family, not what was best for mom. Let me restate that. What was best for all of us, and not just what mom wanted. We erred on the side of doing what mom wanted instead of doing what she needed, because she needed to be out of her home. She could no longer live there safely, and particularly since she would not allow somebody to come into the home to help her out with that. So that's thinking about that. That changes the way I now look at powers of attorney, to think about, this can't just be about me and my wishes. My wishes go beyond the selfish thing that I might want for myself. I also care about people who might be taking care of me, like my family. And I would want it to be good for them too. I would not to destroy their life when I'm on the way out of mine, which is, I think, one of the reasons, for example, at least in our family, again, this is a good example, Denise, of how a painful lesson learned can inform future generations, because both my dad and my maternal uncle lingered in comas for a very, very long time. And so we lived through the consequences of that. As a result, we all have pretty clear plans about how we want them to be able to pull the plug, because we went through that painful experience, and we had a chance to actually think about it. I appreciate you raising this, because even though we had a difficult lesson learned regarding these end of life wishes and all of that, I don't know that our powers of attorney reflect that. So this, thanks to you, I'm going to be able to go back, and our family will be taking a look at that.
yeah, because what if there's a legal document like the power of attorney that really is a much broader statement about our belief systems? So for instance, I thought the article did a really great job of educating us about consent and the struggle of honoring choices when we're not sure if it's a choice that the then self would have made, or is it just the now self? So for instance, it broke out, okay, Diane's wishes. Are those wishes that she would have agreed to 10 years ago prior to her dementia diagnosis? Or do we just follow what her wishes are now when she is diagnosed with dementia? And I think we can put stuff like that in our advanced directives. We can state what we believe about honoring the then self versus the now self. So in that Slate article, I'll try to dig it up because it was fabulous. And it really started me thinking about powers of attorney in a different way. They talked about how the girlfriend and her adult children were really struggling with her decision to follow her heart, but they were just struggling with, is this love during dementia? And her daughter ultimately was like, this is making my mom happy. I'm going to really honor the now self. And the boyfriend, his adult son, had a terrible time with it and really could not stomach the relationship. So much so, he moved his father out of the facility. And Dorothy, who was the girlfriend, I always remember their names, Bob and Dorothy. Dorothy, who was the girlfriend, stayed in the facility. And once Bob moved, she lost weight and she exhibited all the signs of someone with a broken heart. So it's fascinating to think about love and how love stays with us regardless of a diagnosis. And I also think if we're looking at a power of attorney for finances and medical decisions, I also think we need to look at a power of attorney for love. What does love look like for us when we're in our older years, when we might have a diagnosis of dementia? We're going to actually do a follow-up in August around this idea. I'm going to do a 3-part series this summer. In August, we'll talk about a power of attorney for love. What does that look like? How do we express that? How do we have conversations today with our family members so that they feel better empowered to make decisions on our behalf in 40 years or 30 years, whatever it might be? And I think this power of attorney gives us this opportunity to spell out what we believe around, for instance, that's the then self versus the now self. It could also answer the question, okay, is this choice coming from me or from my disease process? We can give guidance within our power of attorney that says, okay, choices from me might be around these categories. Choices from my disease process might come from these categories. So we can give much greater guidance, knowing that there are so many nuances to these kinds of decisions. Rather than leaving our family members guessing, we can empower them with good information based on our belief systems. Okay, so what do you guys think about that? Yay, nay, maybe.
I just think it's, wow, talk about complicated.
Yes.
Who knows what the end is going to look like, and what and of course, what we're learning about diseases and their natural history and what might happen in the future. I mean, as I think about, we're making a lot of black and white choices right now in like our living wills, and this is so much more subtle. There's so many shades of gray. I can't imagine that we'll have a legal document that can specify this, but there's got to be something else, something about, maybe it's in your notion of checks and balances. Maybe it's some statement of philosophy of life. I don't,
Yes,
I
right,
don't know.
right. Yes,
This is,
yes,
my philosophy of life. I can also understand, and that in different areas, some people might be more sexually open and others might not.
right,
And
yes,
that could be
yes.
generational, it could be cultural, but, just to be able to say that, sort of generally, here are all the aspects of my life in which I believe I can continue. I should be able to continue to make these decisions. I'm going to
Yes.
fall back on, unless it's dangerous,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
or harms another person,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
kind of, that's where I would draw the line.
So, okay, so Lily found the article. So I'll include, thank you for finding this. I'll include a link to it so that you guys can also read it. And there is a link to it in the chat room. It's called An Affair to Remember. And it's
Yeah, I
Dorothy.
understand that this is far more common than people realize.
Oh, it's very common.
You know,
Very
including
common.
in nursing homes, not
Oh,
just in
yes.
assisted living or,
Yes.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They were in a facility. They were, I don't remember if it was assisted living or a skilled nursing facility. Absolutely. And I think it speaks to, we are multi-dimensional human beings, including when we have a diagnosis like dementia.
I never talked to my brother about this, but I'm really curious what John would say. I would appreciate a man's opinion.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting about Bob and Dorothy is that Dorothy and her daughter were okay, but it was Bob's son that really just he was completely freaked out about it. Yeah. And Lily, the New York Times article, I'll just put it in the chat room, is what inspired our conversation today. And there was a link to it in actually registering for it. So I'll just put it in the chat.
I kind of think that, it's okay if they feel that's what they want to do, and it's not, like, as you said, it's not harming anyone, then, whether it's the then self or the now self, it's the now self now because they want to have sex now. So,
Right, there you go. Right, that's it, right?
I mean,
Yes, yes.
the bottom line is, whatever decision they make about anything, is it harming them or is it harming anyone else?
Right.
The
So,
issue is in the mind, and the mind is saying, now I want to have sex. So
well,
you got somebody to have sex with, well, that's willing,
it's the consent issue. So for instance, in
the
this
person is consenting.
yeah.
Now,
So
a third party, and it's not a menage a trois.
right. So
outside party said, no, y'all shouldn't be doing that. Why?
well, so here's what the daughters in the most recent article were concerned about, was whether or not their mom was able to give consent. They did not know if she was able to give consent. Now, in the Slate article, Dorothy, you could tell she was giving consent based on how she interacted with Bob, how much she loved him, but the daughters of Diane weren't sure if she could give consent. So it gets very muddy, because then you're thinking, well, I am here because I want to protect someone who is vulnerable. So how do I protect someone if I'm not sure whether or not they are in a vulnerable state? That's where it gets, it's so complicated. It is so complicated. And I also think there just aren't enough checks and balances in place, so that, for instance, in this New York Times article, they gave the amount of lawyers who were involved in really Diane's situation. I think there were 8 attorneys, and I think the legal bills were something like $400,000. And it all came out of Diane's estate. She was paying all these attorney fees. And you have to just really wonder, where was the check? Where was the balance, so that all this money didn't go? And in some regard, it felt like it was frivolous. The lawsuits became frivolous. There was a guardian who was appointed on Diane's behalf, and she sued one of the daughters because the daughters posted on Facebook about the guardianship battle. It was really getting to be, I guess, lack of a better word, frivolous. So
Well,
go ahead.
Abusive.
Yes, right.
That's abusive.
Yes.
like a cash cow.
Yes, she had a $4 million estate, and that's what really had the daughters concerned, because the boyfriend, who, it's such a complicated story too, because the family dynamics are complicated. So Diane started a relationship with Denzel, who was the former father-in-law of one of Diane's adult daughters. So Diane's
That was the
daughter,
problem then.
yes, Diane's daughter had
That
divorced
was
her
the
husband,
problem.
and her husband's father was the new boyfriend of Diane. And when Diane would talk about Denzel in the past, she would say unkind things about him. So they were very surprised that she was starting this relationship with him. And
Yeah.
then, you know, the other piece of it too is, okay, so what it seemed to me was about power and control, ultimately. So what happened is Denzel, for instance, started blocking visits from Diane's daughters when Diane was placed in a facility. And the guardian that was appointed allowed that to happen. So there was such a disruption in relationships that you have to wonder how much harm was done because of that. The other piece about this article too, that talks about Diane's daughters wanting her to be careful. And all of us who have cared for a family member understand this need for safety. We want our family member to be safe, and our caree wants independence. So there's this tension between safety and independence. And so Diane's daughters would always encourage her to be careful. And Denzel would say, I get careful, but she also has to live too.
Right, right.
The other piece of this that I thought was interesting is there was a late diagnosis for Diane. Diane was seeing a nurse practitioner, and the nurse practitioner had a really odd diagnosis. And I'm using that term loosely for Diane. It was something like benign forgetfulness is what she called it. Yes, benign forgetfulness. So what it allowed then was Denzel to think, well, she's okay. She sees this nurse practitioner. The nurse practitioner has not diagnosed her with dementia. I think that the daughters are overreacting. And it wasn't until the daughters took her to a university system that they had a formal diagnosis given. Okay. So here's the other piece. Yes. So one of the comments in the chat room is that the daughters were overly protective at times.
Yes.
And that's right. That's where you
Yes.
we're always trying to juggle that be careful versus independence. And I think the daughters, and I mind reading here, but I think they just weren't sure what their role was in helping their mom, because they weren't sure whether or not she was really and truly okay with the relationship with Denzel. So they just were always trying to figure out what's the right way. The other piece that was interesting is everything went to a legal system. And so in the comments, and if you read the comments, you'll notice that one of the daughters is very active in sharing additional details. So someone had asked in the comment section, well, why couldn't they have used a mediator? And apparently the daughters did try. They did try to have a mediator work with them and Denzel to really come to what's the compromise? What could we agree to? Where's our consensus? And they just couldn't get anywhere. The other piece of it too is they just briefly mentioned, but at one point, Denzel and Diane married. And this was when she had a guardian. And the daughters found out, not because anybody told them, they just happened to hear that they thought Diane and Denzel had married. And so they were able to get the marriage annulled. Okay, so this is interesting, this comment, Sharday, thank you for this. So the comment is the daughters viewed her diagnosis as a light switch, on and off, rather than a gradient of lucidity. And that was the other part of the article that I thought was educational. I wonder if which really went into this idea of how do we make decisions? How do we keep decision-making capacity? And it talked about in the article that you don't lose decision-making capacity at time of a diagnosis of dementia, that it is something that you can maintain for a long time, that just because you have a diagnosis of dementia doesn't mean that you can't make decisions. So that's an excellent point too. So they described decision-making capacity as you understand relevant information, you appreciate the nature of your condition and the risks of benefits of treatment, you can reason your way to a conclusion, and you can communicate your choice. I thought that was really interesting too. Okay. I'm just curious if there was one theme that really stood out to you when you were reading the article. So I just listed a couple. Wishes, systems, decisions.
Well, I'm sorry that I'm going to have to go. I got to be on a LinkedIn Live in a few minutes, but I want to say this is a really great discussion. I really appreciate your having it. And the one thing that in the article that also pops out for me, and the thing that my brother and I have always worried about for my mom, is what would happen if the legal system got involved and a guardian was appointed. We were worried about losing that control. And when it came to the notion of control, we might have battled my mother for it to see which of us had the better idea and should be in control of her circumstances. But what we knew for sure is that nobody besides my brother and I would care about her the way that we did.
Exactly.
And we did not want a stranger stepping in, and especially when you see the sort of abuse that happened in a situation like this. There's a financial incentive for attorneys and guardians to do this. There's a disincentive for us to allow it to happen for all kinds of reasons. So in addition to everything else, somewhere on here has got to go the caring that the family has, which of course in our case, we have more than demonstrated by years of caregiving, and even before caregiving, engaging with her in all kinds of ways. I mean, we were good kids as adults. So weren't always as kids, but as adults, we were good kids. And that I don't think it would have been taken into account. We worried about that, and from time to time, we still worry about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Glenna. Thank you. You know, I the other piece of this too, and Melody, you talk in the chat room about the lengthy process and ineffective nature of the legal system. What was interesting was the timeline of the situation and how so much was still in the legal system through very much the end of Diane's life. And it was really the last few weeks where the legal system made a decision about guardianship and where Diane could reside. And by the time they moved her to a facility they thought she wanted to go to, she was at the very end of her life. So there was so much uncertainty, and I think of it as chaos at the end of Diane's life. It wasn't a calm situation from any perspective. Even if you think, well, Diane had appeared in the courtroom, she was part of the initial process, but probably not toward the end, she still would have been impacted by that stress. And they also talk about how her nurse practitioner had prescribed something for her stress because she would have these stressful reactions and Denzel would ask for her stress pill, and then they would give her a pill. And this is when she resided in a facility. Yeah, okay, so Sade is writing in the chat room. It's a good point to reason on with siblings that have dysfunctional relationships with each other. Better to work together than have a stranger appointed to make decisions for you. Now, in my family, we all have a difficult relationship with one of my siblings. And we removed her from the power of attorney that she was appointed with one of my parents. Now, my parents were of sound mind and made that decision, but we had started to see the fracture in the relationship, and we're starting to worry about if, for instance, I was the primary power of attorney, my older sister was the backup. If I wasn't available and my older sister was then the next to make the decisions, she was so far removed from my parents' wishes, my parents' situation. We were really concerned that she would know what was the right decision. And we all decided as a family that my sister would be removed as a power of attorney. And then we went to the attorney, my brother, myself, and my parents, to have those changes. And we never involved my sister in that decision, because it wasn't her decision, it was my parents' decision as to who was their power of attorney. And so we didn't have to bring my sister into it. There were other things that my parents did to protect their assets, for instance, as it relates to my older sister too. So it was a conversation that I had over a period of time with my parents. I just said, I'm a power of attorney, and so is my older sister. I just want to make sure you're comfortable with her making decisions for you if I can't. And it took, I would say, a couple years before my mom finally said, you're right. We really need to be able to trust who can make the right decisions. And she is so far removed from the family system that it's not appropriate to have her be anywhere near a decision. And that's when we went to the attorney. And again, my parents were of sound mind. It was a conversation we had over a period of time. It wasn't knee-jerk, it wasn't snap. And we did it with guidance from the attorney too. We explained the situation to the attorney. We did some other things to protect, again, my parents and their assets that the attorney had suggested. I will tell you, it was heartbreaking for my mom. Absolutely heartbreaking, because the rift in the relationship was there. It was impossible for us to repair it. We had done everything possible to repair the rift. And for my mom, this was not just a rift, but a break. It was broken. It was heartbreaking for her. It was heartbreaking, but she knew what the right thing was. Oh, but I do think we do have to think about, where is the money going? So I think about Diane's estate. How would she have felt if she knew all this money was going to 8 different attorneys? And really, without I'm not sure that any good decision ever came from all that battling. Okay. Oh, yes. Carrie, thank you for this. So what the article makes clear, and Carrie is sharing this in the chat room, in legal disputes about cognitive capacity, it is not doctors, but judges and lawyers who have the final say. Absolutely. I had done a workshop a couple years ago with an attorney, and the attorney was talking about how complicated it is to determine whether or not someone is of sound mind, for instance, to make a legal decision, and how hard it is for attorneys to figure that out. But yet the attorneys are the ones that have the say about whether or not someone can actually make these decisions. Okay, Sharday, it's a great question. So what if there wasn't money? What if Diane was not a wealthy woman? Then what happens in terms of attorneys? And I would say it never gets to this place. That in many ways, the money drives the attorneys that are hired. And I'm not sure if there weren't the assets, if it would have gotten to this place. There could have been other battles, but I'm not sure it would have been this extensive. Yeah, so the court could have appointed one and it may have ended sooner. Absolutely. Yep. Thank you, Melody. Yeah, because I think the battle of over control wouldn't have been such a ferocious battle. I think the sisters were just very, very concerned about Denzel's motivations.
Ms. Denise, I thought that the power of attorney was put in place so that you wouldn't have all this legal stuff going on and people, trying to get money just because they're attorney and saying, well, she said this day and she said that. I thought that was the reason of the power of attorney, and it seems like it makes it more difficult and more confusing.
Well, so this is the part that I'm not clear about. Diane appointed Denzel her power of attorney, and that's when things got very complicated. But I'm not sure if there was a power of attorney in place that Diane revoked. So it was always the question of competence and always the question of wishes. What were Diane's true wishes? How competent was Diane?
And how competent was Denzel?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And again, there were all these attorneys involved, and it didn't seem like anyone had the common sense or the capacity to release the emotional involvement. It was such an emotionally charged experience to say, okay, let's step back and see about what we can do to ensure that Diane's last years on earth have peace and calm and love. And I think that was the significant sacrifice, is that it seemed like peace and calm and love ultimately were sacrificed. Okay. So I'm wondering if anybody thinks the sisters did anything well. Yeah, so Melody is sharing that she's in a similar situation with a sibling as it relates to their Carrie. And what's interesting, Melody, is that they talk about in this article that Diane was very verbal. And so her ability to still retain communication skills meant people didn't quite understand where she was in the disease process. And so in Melody's situation, her Carrie has difficulty with verbal expression. And so unfortunately, it sounds like Melody, people are making that jump from, if she's not able to verbally express herself, then she must be incompetent. And that's not the case. And then going through that legal system of trying to figure out who's competent, what's the definition of competent, can be very, very frustrating.
Yes, it's incredibly frustrating. It's the opposite of the article where, like you said, where the inability, my mother can actually speak in short, halting sentences. but she requires a lot of context to be able to make decisions. So you understand, so everyone understands that she understands what's going on. She reacts appropriately to everything that happens around her. You know, she laughs when something is funny. She has memories that she brings, that she initiates conversations, even if it's just 1 or 2 words that start the conversation. But my brother's convinced, because she cannot speak fluently like I'm speaking right now, that means that she's like not there. And no doctor, she had a stroke, and strokes often lead to dementia. I'm not sorry, strokes often lead to aphasia, the communication disability that she has. She's never been diagnosed with dementia, early stage, any stage. But he's convinced, you know, because she has a communication disability, that means that she can't make decisions. And it's really difficult because the legal system does not understand those nuances in medical situations, right? So they don't understand aphasia and the condition of aphasia, and how it's not a disability or a diagnosis of intellect or cognition, but a diagnosis of communication. And much like someone who was born without the ability to speak is not necessarily incompetent, they just can't speak. And so it's really difficult trying to, you know, with this idea of the lawyers and the judges make the case, that it's like, if they don't understand the diagnosis, if they don't understand the medical situation, how these things unfold, and what they actually mean, then they're not really able to make a good decision or a good ruling on whether or not someone is competent or able to make decisions on their own or needs a guardian. So it's a really, really complicated process. And, you know, like the daughters did in this article, me and my eldest brother, I have 2 siblings, and my eldest brother and I are on one side and my other brother's on the other. You know, it's one of these situations where we have to really rely on the medical doctors, the experts, to say, you know, this is what's, and they don't agree. Just like in this article, like they don't, the doctors my brother hired and the doctors that my mother has been seeing, who have not been hired by me or anyone, but who are her doctors, disagree. And it's, you know, it's like someone's paying someone to say something, and it's just such a difficult situation. And in the crosshairs is a very competent person, my mother, who's just watching this go on and on and on and on, you know. And it's just got to be, it just, for me, this article really highlights the importance of the power of attorney, the will, all those things before anything happens to you, right? Like having those things in place. Because my mother had none of those things in place and was unmarried. So her next of kin was her 3 children who do not agree. So it just becomes so fraught, and the amount of money and time and lives on hold, you know, all what I count to be is like the worst year of my mother's life, because she was so independent, and then she became fully dependent. It's really heartbreaking. And it just goes to show like the importance of those communications, like sitting down with everyone and saying, here's what I want if something like this were to happen to me. But I think a lot of people just don't think about, maybe they think about, oh, someday I'll die, but they don't think about these kind of middle situations where you're still here, but your brain or your ability to communicate becomes, you know, starts to change. And it becomes really difficult to communicate or believe what someone is communicating. I also think that there's just a lot of ableism and ageism that's like live in this article. It was everywhere, but also in the legal process, in the things that people believe an older adult can and can't do, or someone with disabilities should or shouldn't be able to do. It's heartbreaking that we think of people with disabilities in such a limited way.
Yes, being less than. And I think it's just absolutely heartbreaking, because you think, oh my gosh, this is the last thing we would want for our mom, given all that she's already coping with, that she has to cope with this too. That's, yeah. And it's just a good reminder that when we're young, it's good to put these documents in place. I used to do this power of attorney for love presentation, which I'll do in August. And I would start off in this workshop with healthcare professionals who worked with older adults in facilities. So powers of attorney were a natural part of their day. And I would start the conversation with, how many in the room have created their powers of attorney for themselves? And it was always just about 10% of the room. No one was doing it for themselves. They were always saying to others, you have to do it, but no one was doing it for themselves, which I always found was so, oh my gosh, you know, we have to do it for ourselves. We have to do it for ourselves. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Melody. I hope that you'll keep us posted on how this unfolds. And I hope that there is,
Yeah.
I hope there is loving closure around this situation for the family. Lily, I think that you wanted to add.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to first thank Melody for sharing her story. I think the only way we can learn is to learn about unfortunate real lived experience. Because we have such a knowledgeable group, I just had a quick question, Denise and the team here. That incompetence term, if legally it is something that we're seeking, who actually is the definitive on that? Is it the medical side, the legal side, or both? And is it even in law? So thank you for that quick question.
Okay, so it's legal. And when you read the article, they talk about, and Carrie had posted in the chat room. Okay. In the end, in legal disputes about cognitive capacity, it is not doctors, but judges and lawyers who have the final say. And in the article, they talk about the trial where they had doctors actually testify about Diane's competence, but it was the judge who actually made the decisions. So that's the part that I think we're all just really concerned about. And that's, I think, Melody, you spoke about this so eloquently, that it's strangers who don't know our carees who are making decisions about their competence. And that is a huge concern for us, because we know the full person. We know what's possible within this individual. We don't see them as less than. We look at more than. We see all the dimensions. And what's unfortunate is the legal system might just see one dimension. And that's the part that's so concerning, which is why we really want to have these legal documents in place and have the conversations and update our legal documents. It's not just one and done. We want to make sure that they're current. Again, with my sister, right? So we updated my parents' power of attorney to remove her as a decision maker. So you want to make sure that the legal documents reflect the current situation and that the conversations continue. So the conversation that we're having today is so helpful for all of us, right? Because it helps us think through what are the what ifs, and then we can start the conversation with people in our lives so that they're aware of our belief systems, our values. We can give guidance to someone who is trying to make a decision for us at some point in our future life. And they can feel good given that we've already shared our values, our priorities, so they can go from the guidance that we offer. Okay. Oh, you could look at updating. When you have a power of attorney created, ask the attorney, how often do I update it? I just had heard from someone that she had to update a power of attorney at 10 years. So you could just go back to the power of attorney and say, we did this so many years ago, just want to make sure it's still good. How often should we update it? Okay. I just wanted to close just for a couple minutes. What's missing in our communities in terms of solutions we could use that help us when we're navigating something so complex and heartbreaking? I'd love to hear what you think about what are the solutions we need that we just don't have. Okay, so more social workers, right? And you know what? Maybe it's this idea that we have facilitated conversations within our families on a regular basis. And maybe it's that the social workers embedded in our communities can help us with these conversations. We do a family emergency planning session that's free every month. It's the fourth Friday of the month. And we talk about these kinds of situations because we want to encourage everybody to have conversations. And sometimes I just think we're not sure how to start it. So maybe having these embedded facilitators, for instance, within our communities could help. And I think about it, for instance, within our houses of worship or our community organizations. Or, I mean, this is never going to happen, but what the heck, I'll just throw it out there. In our doctor's offices, one of the other free planning tools we do is after the diagnosis. So anytime a family member has a diagnosis, you can join me for a conversation about what happens next because of the diagnosis, because everything changes. And I think palliative care, when that starts for a Carrie, and when hospice care starts for a Carrie, those are two diagnoses that are overlooked. And we have to think of them as diagnoses. Because, for instance, conversations like this could be really helpful when palliative care starts. And that way, when hospice care starts, you've got the conversations documented. You just add on to them. Yeah, thank you, Melody. It's this idea that as the family caregivers, we have all this responsibility and it's enormous. And what if there was a better way to educate everyone about what it's like to get older, to have a disease process, and how can we support the family caregiver better? Yeah, more workshops around legal documents, power of attorneys, elbow law attorneys in one place. Okay, thanks everybody for sharing those resources. Thank you, Lily, for sharing that resource. Okay. So I just want to mention, we're going to have another workshop in June 27th. So it's Healing the Lifelong Family Rifts. I thought it would be helpful to continue this conversation in a more specific way. So the next workshop is going to be around family rifts. And so I talked to you about my rift in our family with my sister, but that's not the first rift. We have generations of rifts. And so I thought it would be helpful to talk through how do we actually heal these rifts. And sometimes our definition of healing isn't necessarily reconnecting. And so we'll talk through that. And if you are a member of Caring Our Way, you can register to join that workshop. It's a free workshop. If you want a CEU, it's $20, and I give you some more details about which professionals can earn a CEU. And if you haven't joined us at caringourway.com, you can. It's free. You just create an account, and then you can join us at any of our upcoming events. Okay, thank you guys. This was really helpful. I knew that if we got together, we could have a really interesting and compelling conversation and motivation to think through what do we want to do differently for ourselves. And then just one other request. If you are currently caring for someone, we are capturing stories about what it's like to navigate the 17 caregiving systems. So if you'd like to tell me about it, you can go to our training academy website, which is careyearsacademy.com, and schedule 30 minutes with me and tell me what it's like to navigate all these systems. The legal system is one, the medical system is one, family system is one, narcissism is one. And you could say that there was this really light theme of narcissism in this story in the New York Times. Okay, because I'd love to hear what your experiences are navigating all these systems. Okay, thanks everybody so much for being here. It was great to connect. I so appreciate it. I so appreciate you taking the time too today. Post the archive tomorrow, and then let's stay connected. I'd love to hear updates about how you guys are doing. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.